Okay, welcome back to Leaderful. Today we're going to dig into some of the core problems that we see that exist currently in the workplace and more broadly, I think, in society and in life. And I'm sure that most of you listening will resonate with one of these or another. I know I've certainly encountered all of these in some form or other in my journey as a leader and also as an employee in organizations. So Pablo, welcome back and let's dig in.
Yeah, I'll just add, as collaborators and as design thinkers, human-centered, systems-conscious design thinkers, I'd love people to share their thoughts as we dig deeper into these, because I think we're trying to capture them at, a specific level. And I'm curious. I guess that's another thing about us is we're super curious is, are we getting to the root or could we go deeper? So anyways, the ones we came up with, in terms of problems that we're excited about, opportunities that we see to create meaningful change. We came up with burnout. And just for listeners, think about this at the systems of like yourself, your individual burnout potentially. The small we, which could be your family unit, could be, the marketing department you're a part of or a small community group, maybe a Facebook group that you're part of that you engage with, and then the bigger we, which could be your organization or maybe an institution you're part of, outside of work. Mm-hmm. So burnout, that was one of them. Stuckness, and I think we talked about some things we're hearing about complacency, languishing, things like that. The third one was conflict. And we played around with this because we didn't want this word to have when we're talking about conflict, we always want it to have a positive connotation because we think there's a lot of gifts in productive tension and healthy conflict. But conflict is one. And we've got disconnection. All right. So when we think of the problems that, as collaborators and human-centered and systems-conscious designers that we love to dig into with our clients, we came up with these, 5 or 6 themes. Number 1 being burnout. Number 2, stuckness, things like complacency, languishing. Conflict, the unhealthy type, the harmful conflict, even artificial harmony being one of those. Disconnection, we hear a lot about from clients how they're operating in silos, they're not meaningfully connected to each other or the larger vision. We hear about incongruent experiences or misaligned priorities. Misused power. All roads lead to power in the work that we do, and so we'll share what we mean by that. And then the one that both Jeff and I are super excited about because we feel it's jolty and should pique some interest is what we're calling unethical leadership.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think it's interesting for us to even just create this list. It's out of character for us because we tend to view problems as opportunities and we always jump to positive framing of these things. But I do think it's important for us to acknowledge that these things exist. The data is pretty clear that burnout is a huge problem in society across the planet. We're seeing it in all kinds of ways, from quiet quitting and the Great Resignation to stress levels and addiction levels. Like you can see the manifestation of burnout in society, and I know I can see it in my own life and have seen it in my own life before. So I think it's important for us to spend some time on these to get clear on why these problems exist, because another problem, or I guess a thing that I notice in society, is that we'll see the symptoms of these problems, right? We'll see the symptoms of disconnection or burnout or misuses of power, and then we'll try and chase those symptoms. And a lot of clients of ours, and I'm probably guilty of this myself, it's like, I'm just going to deal with the short-term ramifications of this thing and just like put it out for a little while, put out that fire, and we end up firefighting a lot or Band-Aid solutioning.
Whack-a-mole.
Whack-a-mole.
Remember that game?
Yeah. Something pops his head up, we try and knock it down, and then something pops up over here, and it's actually the same issue, just manifesting in different ways. And so, so I think we do need to spend some time here digging into the root causes of some of these things, how they're interconnected with each other, because that was actually a challenge for us to actually tease them out of each other, right? Because they are so interconnected. What is the impact of misuses of power on on an employee, well, it might be disconnection. And what's the result of disconnection? Well, it might be burnout, right? And it might be unhealthy conflict or artificial harmony. So these things, even though we've identified them as separate things, I think through the course of these conversations, we're going to see how interconnected they really are. But let's start maybe at a level up from this around this idea of intention versus impact, because I think that that's a fundamental thing that we've noticed is that, you know, no one wakes up in the morning. I don't wake up in the morning and say, how can I frustrate my children today? How can I frustrate my employees? How can I misuse my power? And yet it happens, right? And so we have good intentions. I think all of us probably have these good intentions in those quiet moments when we're sitting by ourselves in a coffee shop, or we're, you know, going for that long drive and we've got a little bit of space to reflect. We want to have a positive impact in the world. That's our intention. And yet we look at all of these indicators of unhealthy workplaces and people who are suffering or struggling in the workplace. The impact of leadership is not always great. And so maybe I'm actually pointing us in the direction of unethical leadership or misuses of power is the first one to dig into. So I'm just going to toss the ball back to you, and which one makes sense for us to dig into?
Yeah, I think listeners are probably going to, I mean, maybe it's just me self-serving, but unethical leadership is punchy.
All right.
And so I'd love to dig into that because there's probably a bunch of assumptions out there about what we mean.
All right. So when you say unethical leadership as a problem in the world, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so some of this comes from personal experience. I've probably done this. Well, I have in the past, and in other times it's been observations about struggles we've had with clients to really activate learning or the change that we've set out to create. And so, you know, for me, when I think of leadership, we defined it earlier as, you know, leaders are people that take responsibility for themselves and their world. There's a willingness, you know, am I willing to recognize that I've been wrong by doing this thing, or that I may have hurt people, you know? Am I willing to learn that my assumptions were actually incorrect because I never took the time to clear them with the people I had them with, you know? And so I think there's a lot of that self-exploration. People are already doing it, but maybe not feeling so safe to do it as a leader. I think that's sometimes hard, you know, for us as employees, if we've been employees and we have leaders, to really have empathy for our leaders, you know?
Oh, for sure. I know, like, guilty as charged. Super easy for me to look down the chain or into the people that I support as a leader, you know, my employees, and have lots of empathy for their experience, and then turn around and look up the chain to the CEO or the executive director of the board or whoever happens to live above me and be like, get your shit together. You should know better. You should do this or that, and not have a lot of empathy for the experience they might be having. I think that we could probably all resonate with that to some level. Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's just, you know, obviously there's the leaders that we see on an org structure that we report to. But I think what we're talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, is for us, you know, leadership, it isn't a title, and where we're talking about this right now. And we also want to be aware that, yes, that exists. There's power dynamics. You know, you'll talk about the different types of power that exist. So we don't want to be ignorant of those. But I think what we're talking about here is, you know, when you look at the parts of your life that you want to take responsibility for, the impact you want to have in the world, you know, unethical leadership is something you're going to want to explore. And that's what I think we're doing right now. So for me, again, like I said, it's a willingness to, it's humility. It's exploring, making sure that you're surrounding yourself with a diversity. Well, you're creating, first of all, the conditions for people to feel like they can participate, contribute, challenge, but you're looking for different perspectives, you know, listening deeply to people's experiences and really honing in on, you know, not only the individual, but the team level needs, their values, their goals. And if they're struggling to get there, that, you know, you're offering that support to get there. I think it's, you know, reviewing your set of skills and to see, are they going to serve you in this new evolution of your leadership? And where I can go on, so I'm just going to pass it over to you, but because this is your area of expertise, but definitely I think it's more awareness around your power, you know, as a leader, and where you might be misusing it.
Mm-hmm. Unethical leadership for me, again, goes back to intention versus impact, because what we're not saying, I'm not, proposing that people are intentionally unethical, right? I actually very rarely meet someone who I would even hazard a guess that they're intentionally going about the world trying to cause harm. So unethical leadership, let's remove our good intentions from that for a second and just look at like what actually is ethics, because for a lot of professionals, or for a lot of us, ethics boil down to things you shouldn't do. Like rules of behavior, so codes of ethics for, a profession are usually lists of rules of ways not to screw up, right, with your power, right? They're essentially this, like the one half of the power dynamic, which is don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. And it's really about covering your butt and making sure that that's what most ethical codes are kind of oriented towards. And so ethics gets a bit of a bad rap as a result of, right? No one wants to go before the ethical review committee at any given time, right? But that list of what not to do isn't actually often that helpful, because that's usually, fairly common sense or fairly like connected to some sort of moral value that we have. Ethics for me, it really goes down to our own values and the values of the system that we're within. And so unethical leadership is leadership that is misaligned with values, behaviors and actions that we take as leaders that are self-serving potentially, meeting our own needs at the expense of somebody else's needs, whether they're our employees or the system, or centering the system's needs at the expense of our employees. That's probably the one that happens the most. Like, yeah, I don't really care that you have that thing. You need to be at work by X point in time, or that report needs to be on my desk by Friday at whatever, right? So it's that awareness of values, back to that awareness, will, and skill. And I think it is will first. It is that willingness and to do that self-reflection, to say, where is my behavior or the actions or the decisions that I'm making? Where is it congruent with my values, and where is it incongruent? Because anytime we're taking action that's incongruent with our values, I think we're at risk of this unethical leadership. And so that's the perspective that I'm hoping people take from this conversation. It has actually nothing to do with our intentions, because I make a lot of assumptions that our intentions are actually good. 99% of the time, we're trying to have a positive impact in the world and use our power well. And yet these misuses of power start to occur. And so let's shift gears over to misuses of power, because it is pretty tightly connected to this idea of unethical leadership. And maybe I'll take a first stab at it, and then I'll pass it over to you. So when we think about misuses of power, it's a core realization, I think, that's important, is that everything is an act of power. When you have power, the choices that you make, the decisions that you make, the choices you don't make, the things you do and the things you don't do are all expressions of that power. And we'll have a separate episode about power and the different types and the power dynamic and all of those things, I'm sure, moving forward. But just if we hone in on like a role power. So let's say you're in a role. You're a leader with a title, and you've got a team that reports to you. Right? Within that power, there are expectations that certain things happen. Right? And it's misuses of power when we set those expectations, hold people accountable, do things that, again, don't consider their needs. Right? They're very much, that's about us and our needs or the bigger system, and we don't take a human-centered approach. So I think human-centeredness and misuses of power are really tightly connected. It's hard to misuse your power if you have a very deep understanding and care for the needs of the people that you're there to support. Right? When you center that and you understand what those are, using your power gets a lot easier. And so a lot of misuses of power, I would say, are accidental and unintentional, it doesn't mitigate the impact. They have very real impact. And we'll talk about burnout. We'll talk about disconnection. We'll talk about some of the things that happen when power gets misused by people. But again, the core takeaway, I think, at this stage in the conversation is they're often accidental and unintentional, but that doesn't absolve us of being responsible for it, right? And so power awareness, when we talk about, global, that willingness and awareness, it's like, how much power do I actually have in this relationship or in this system? And what does that mean? Right? How do I need to use that power and think about it? And how do I want it to be experienced by other people? So in a nutshell, that's my first take on this topic area, misuses of power. But what comes to mind for you, or what are some examples or stories from your own life where you've seen this kind of unintentional misuse of power?
Yeah, it's funny. You introduced me to the right use of power framework, and I had the opportunity to do a course with them, and it really helped me to elevate my awareness around power, especially to create a new definition. I think we have a really simple one. I think it's the ability to prevent or affect change, right? And I love that, because it's, for me personally, as I identify as a white male, straight, in my 40s, I totally it raised more awareness of how I was showing up with the various hats I wore, as a father, husband, friend, CEO, co-CEO. And I think one thing that's really stood out for me from our conversations is misuse can sometimes be as simple as not using your power. I think, that you have the ability to prevent or affect change, but you choose, maybe unintentionally, to do nothing. And so, like, for me, that's been, as a leader, when I reflect, there's been moments that it's raised my level of awareness, and I'm trying to be more conscious about, the situations where I have an opportunity to use my power, to live my values, our core values as an organization, to meet the needs of not only, our employees and myself, but our clients. And so for me, power has been that core driver of creating, being, better as a leader and creating a really powerful culture. And I love I'm going off on a tangent here, but I know that culture can be translated in Latin to care. And that's really how I see culture, is how do we care for each other, be with each other through our beliefs, actions, decisions. So,
great point. Then I'll just punctuate this conversation about misuses of power with that. A misuse of power can be an overuse of power, and it can be an underuse or a not use of power. And that's often a shift for people. It's been a shift for me, for sure, to make that consideration as well. It's like, not use my power can be just as detrimental, have just as negative an impact on people that I'm there to support, whether they're my children, my employees, my clients, whoever. If I don't step into that power and pretending I don't have that power or trying to abdicate it it sets up those conditions, for sure, for misuses of power. So yeah, a nuanced topic, and we'll be spending a lot of time, I'm sure, on the podcast exploring power and power dynamics and how it shows up.
Yeah, one last thing on that too, and I think I don't know if this has been my experience. I'd love to hear, from people what their experience has been like. But that word power has always, to me, sounded like aggressive and like jolty and really masculine, right? Because, and what I realized through this whole conversations is that it's, what's that word? It's agnostic. It's not good or bad. It's
neutral.
It's neutral. Mm-hmm. And so I think, I don't know, this comes back to awareness, is just re-examining what these words mean, right? And what they describe. And I think that's going to be exciting for people listening in, like how we talk about power, because, I think a lot of the DEI space, for example, and justice is so new, that there's no formula, template, and I think this is the beauty of, like, this is where ethical leadership and the right use of power can really make a difference in those areas.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. All right, let's shift from unethical leadership and misuses of power to some of maybe their downstream consequences. Maybe they're interconnected to that. Burnout, disconnection, conflict, the unhealthy kind, the unhelpful kind. What makes sense? Where to?
I mean, I don't know about you, but the one that I've been hearing about most from people is burnout.
Let's talk about burnout. I think it's a topic. It's a thing.
Yeah. So let's maybe throw out some other words, other feelings. This is a good way for us to practice our feelings wheel and articulate our feelings. But I've heard overwhelmingness, stress. What are some other ones you've heard? Fatigue,
exhaustion, overwhelm, tired.
Yeah. So if you're feeling any of those or observing anybody feeling these at all levels, let's dig into that.
Yeah. So, when I think about burnout, there's a couple of, it's interesting because it's a set of symptoms, right? It's that, like, overwhelmed, tiredness, exhausted, frustrated, angry, depressed, anxious, addiction, like all of these things are actually, I think, manifest as a result of burnout, or can manifest as a result of burnout. And I guess there's a couple of different pathways. Like, how do we get to a place of burnout? And so maybe it's story time. Actually, maybe it's, Pablo, I know you've burnt out or been close to burnout. I've certainly burnt out in a workplace before. We can explore burnout maybe a little bit through our own journey. And so while you're thinking about that for yourself, I can explore a little bit of that for me. When I think about my own burnout journey and experience, one, it had been normalized in the system that I was a part of. And so the first half of my career, I would say, which is hard because it was a dozen years, which means I'm getting older. So half a career spent in addiction and mental health. So working first as a youth worker and then as a supervisor and leader and, up into management and directorship roles. And burnout was such a normal characteristic of the work that it became just this like expected that people were going to burn out and that we wouldn't get very much of a lifespan out of a worker in that sector because the work was emotionally demanding and exhausting. The hours spent, there were 16-hour days. Like we were exempt from lots of labor laws because of the nature of our program. We could work people 16 hours a day for 4 or 5 days in a row in the wilderness, and they'd get an hour break that we wouldn't take. Like there was a culture of not taking our breaks and caring for ourselves because we were so focused on caring for the other person. And so I think that's maybe unique to the helping services, and certainly the nonprofit sector has that pathological helping where we center other people's needs instead of our own. And I think that sets the recipe, that sets the conditions for burnout to occur because, just because I'm not meeting my needs doesn't mean they're not there. They exist and they're going unmet. And if they go unmet long enough, we hit what Woodry would call a limit, right? We just hit the actual, I have no more capacity, I have nothing left to give. And then we get those downstream side effects of anxiety, depression, fatigue, all of these things. And so I distinctly remember I was in a leadership role. The conditions were ripe for burnout for me when I look back on it. And I had a panic attack standing at my desk. And I had the sweats and nausea and my face went white. My hands started to shake. I thought I'd been hit by the 24-hour flu because, my mental health had been pretty stable up until that point and has been largely since. And so I go into the washroom and I splash some water on my face and I drive home and go to the doctor and he sits me down and he puts me in front of a computer like this and I start answering a screening questionnaire. And of course I've seen lots of these screening questionnaires working in addiction and mental health. I'm like, oh shit, like I'm about to diagnose myself with an anxiety disorder. And sure enough, out popped a moderate anxiety disorder, right? Which is a symptom of this burnout that I was experiencing, right? And lots of conditions were ripe for it. There was a lot of years of just grinding away. There was a lack of support in the system. I was feeling a lack of connection or meaning in that. There were some misuses and abuses of power happening for sure that I was having to respond to that were stressing me out. So lots of factors go into burnout. But those, the primary one for me upon reflection was lack of meaningful connection. So actually being disconnected and then those misuses of power and the stress that those were causing. And what's interesting is that our solutions for burnout are often very individual. Jeff, take a leave from work. Jeff, go for long walks in nature. Jeff, take a little bit of anti-anxiety medication. Jeff, go to therapy. Didn't solve the misuses of power problem. Didn't solve the lack of meaningful connection problem. It's like Band-Aid for Jeff to get him back to functioning and then throw him right back into the same workplace, which I lasted another year or two. And then it's like, yeah, I'm out. So that was my kind of experience, my primary experience with burnout. And then I think I've gotten better at noticing, right, when I'm getting to the edge and being able to avoid kind of hitting that wall as hard as we sometimes do. But when you think about burnout, your own journey with it, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, there's some similarities there. It's funny when you asked that question, my first thought went to a conversation we had here earlier with the manager of the studio that we're in today. And I believe like him, I'm a first generation Canadian, so my parents are immigrants. And it's what I saw growing up was you do what you have to do to support your family, even at the own expense of your health. My father traveled lots, worked long hours. My mom did as well, took care of us. And so like that started from the system that we were a part of in Canada. It was very different than where they came from in France. We've heard about, there's pros and cons, but it's a very different work-life design. And my dad's from Peru. Very different work-life design from France even. And so I grew up with like seeing that behavior and thinking, well, that's what you have to do. Everything for it's not even the sake of, it's, at the fear of losing, right? Mm-hmm. And so, then I played competitive sports. So there's a bit of a culture there. Again, the coaches can make a big difference in that. But when I started joining, I went right into the corporate world, global real estate organization. And they focused in on your needs as a way to motivate you, let's just say. So more money, bigger title, more responsibility, really fast before you're prepared. And just to give people a sense of like what burnout looked like for me, it was some of the behaviors. I would sleep with my phone under my pillow. This might be some of you out there. The sound of a ding on my phone would just like dopamine, like, like just get me fired up. I was operating in a place of fear. And unfortunately, we talk about limits and boundaries, and my wife's a psychologist now. I'm learning more and more about, we all deal with stress, like distress differently. For me, I was not connected to my body, so I didn't know what really was happening. I'd have these moments of like turn red in the face, get super angry, I think I had a couple panic attacks as well, I remember. But deep down, something was going on in my body, and I ended up started passing blood. So that's what burnout looked like to me. I was passing blood. But I didn't know anything about limits, boundaries, ethical self-care, more than just going for a massage or, not that there's anything wrong. I love massages or drinking tea and doing yoga. They all have benefits. Mm-hmm. But, for me, it was burnout turned into me, fast forward 10 years later, having to have my large intestine removed, having to have a bag for a year. Wow. And that's just the physical, tangible things. My relationship with my wife, with my children, all those things have been impacted by being burnt out, not having the capacity, to be who I am, I guess, in a cliche way. Mm-hmm. So that's my burnout story.
Yeah. And I think all of us probably have a version of a burnout story because we live in, and part of that system that we're a part of is that very fast paced, very busy, very, very incongruent maybe with underlying values or valuing certain things.
That was we talked about needs, values, and goals. I had goals to make a certain amount of money and pay off my student debt and to travel the world. So I was getting that met. My needs, I didn't probably know what they were or how to articulate them, but I did know my values. I maybe didn't, maybe I was unethical with them actually. And I remember thinking, and this may be for some of the listeners, I had a coach who told me, think of a weed, like those weeds and it'll bend. And that's your values. Your values will sometimes be tested and they'll bend. The moment they break and you need to know those breaking points, that's when you need to do, that's when something's wrong. And so maybe that's too late. Mm-hmm. And so I'm constantly working on this, but I think for me, what really caused that burnout and all of the symptoms that followed was incongruence between what I was being asked to do and doing. I take responsibility. I was doing things. And my personal values. And I remember just I crushed, I broke.
Mm-hmm. That tension, that underlying misalignment between behavior, what we're doing in the world, and what we want to be doing in the world or how we see ourselves. So there's identity that's wrapped up in that too, and we get confused. And, I certainly have been unpacking my identity as a helping professional. What does that even mean, right? What does it mean to be a helping professional? And does that determine my worth and worthiness? And so I think it's a huge conversation here about burnout and how it manifests and what the drivers are. And so I look forward to digging into that again some more. So thanks for sharing your story. And let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about one of these other problems, and actually disconnection to me is maybe a place to go, because we see disconnection. It can mean a lot of different things, and it can exist in the system in different ways. And so you and I have just told stories of being disconnected internally, probably to our own value system, and behaving in ways or doing things that were disconnected in nature. I was certainly, part of my experience with burnout was disconnection from my own organization, and particularly those with power in that organization in leadership roles. We were not aligned. We were disconnected about what was important, what was meaningful. And as a result, they were taking actions that were, I was perceiving as unethical or wrong, and that was causing a lot of stress. Right? So there's a connection there so disconnection, I think, is one of those underlying forces that drives something like burnout, but I think it's its own thing too. So when you think of disconnection and you look at the workplace and the work environment, what do you think? What do you see?
Yeah, I'll share some of the observations at the surface stuff that we see, because that maybe will help people come on that journey a bit deeper. But we'll hear people saying hey, we never collaborate together, or I just get stuff thrown over the fence and then I got to deal with it, but I don't know the context of it. So, those are some of the stories we hear. The other day we worked with a local organization who has actually a very strong culture when in comparison to, maybe others out there. and people love working there. And so for them, the disconnect is, I get those values and I get what they mean for the organization. I'm still like, I'm struggling with my identity. I don't know how how do those values apply to me? And so that's maybe not like something that is, might seem critical, but it's coming up in conversations. Like, this is the right use of power. This is the ethical leadership. Like, understanding like how those values might connect, how you might help people connect with them, not just your clients and your customers, but your own employees. I think about that a lot recently. So that's one. And then obviously, like, you and I have seen how there seems to be a lot of misalignment. That's a judgment, but some misalignment in the, for example, nonprofit space between board, executive director, and frontline staff. We see, incongruence, for example. Here is a way that we work, and one leader does it one way and another leader does it another way, right? So these are all examples of disconnection. I don't know which one you want to get into.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important point. If we stay up at the level of like what is disconnection and where does it manifest? It certainly manifests at the tactical level of leaders making different decisions, and that the incongruency and the stress of that misalignment that can start to exist, and not through anybody's intention. Everybody's trying to get the job done, whatever they think the job is. But for me, it's that like lack of vision, clarity, lack of alignment on values and ways of working, and spending the time being proactive with those. I think there's a piece of I think the default tendency, and I'll check this, and it's a hypothesis I have. I love your thoughts on it. I think that the default is for us to get disconnected. Is there some level of entropy in a system for people, relationships, if we're not proactively and intentionally trying to connect, taking action to connect, I think we start to disconnect. I'm not sure, but there's a pretty strong force in the world, I think, that has people, in the absence of being proactive and intentional, it's easy to slip into what's in it for me, what's at risk here for me, what am I afraid of, right? And then we start to take action, even subconsciously or unintentionally, to get those needs met, and we start to get that drift starting to happen between what the system needs, when the other individuals within that system, and what we need as individuals. And so when I think about disconnection, I think about values for sure. I think about competing goals and the tension there. I think about silos in organizations where you've got, on paper, we're on the same mission here, but when you get a layer down, it's like, no, this team is on a mission to protect their interests or to grow their portfolio or to do whatever. And we get that internal kind of competition as opposed to collaboration. So that's like, those are disconnecting forces that exist in the world. And so I see a lot of that. And I think of disconnection, actually it's probably a theme that arose in addictions treatment for me when we peel the layers back of why addiction, how does this make sense, right? We see a fundamental disconnection to self. Right, to our own ethics, our own values, the things that are important to us, and we've replaced it with something else. And so if you're part of a system where you've replaced your own, what's important to you, with what's important to the business, I think that's actually a recipe for that fundamental level of disconnection to self, which then starts to manifest in all kinds of ways like burnout and conflict and those types of things.
Yeah, to your earlier point about what connection is, I think for me, it's meaningful connection is conscious, right? It's proactive, like you were saying. It's not something you can take your foot off. You have to, I always struggle with this word, operationalize it. It has to become deeply ingrained in your culture, your way of being, right? And I think, when we talk about meaningful connection, just to repeat, we're talking about needs, core values, goals. Like, those are like the areas that we dig into as individuals, as teams in an organization, and then really looking for those, for lack of a better word, connection points, right? I got that word thrive. I think of that word thrive when there's that harmony, in work life.
Yeah. Awesome. And one of the things that happens, I think, when we are disconnected is it creates the conditions for conflict, unhealthy conflict, artificial harmony, these types of things that we see a lot of. And again, maybe these are symptoms of disconnection, maybe they're their own thing. But when we talk about conflict, and particularly the unhealthy, the dysfunctional kinds of conflict versus productive tension, right? What do we mean by that? And why are we on a mission to rehabilitate conflict and tension for a lot of teams and leaders?
Yeah, I think, with all this talk and hopefully movement around, recognizing, acknowledging, and celebrating diversity, equity, inclusion, we're inviting different perspectives, experiences, beliefs, and there's going to be tension. Now, tension for us, like just even think of an elastic band, like or your muscles. Tension helps build muscle, strength, power. And so I think of things like innovation, performance, like better ideas. Like there's value to tension. Mm-hmm. And so to navigate tension, it requires, I think, what we talked about earlier, like an awareness of power and how to use it. There's a will, obviously, and probably the biggest thing, which I think, and now that I hear us talking, is we really love helping organizations develop those skills that we've identified, for example, to navigate conflict or tension in healthy, productive ways. So I guess for us, there are a lot of gifts in tension. Conflict, when you hear it, it sounds like it's opposing, clashing, and so maybe it is. I mean, maybe tension is the word we want to use. But there are a lot of gifts, and I think deeper, meaningful connections can happen, right? How many times have we we recently had this was a global energy firm, 2 senior leaders that were in conflict, unhealthy conflict, let's call it, unproductive. And when we were able to navigate conflict with personal awareness, a little bit of willingness, and some skill, they were able to realize that they both were after the same thing. Their strategies to achieving or meeting those needs were actually different. And so we were able to close that gap and the experience that's been created, not only for themselves, a relationship, but just throughout the rest of the team. Like that's the impact of that. So, sorry, that's my long way of answering that question.
Yeah, no, it's great. I think it's partly rehabilitating the idea of conflict, not something to be avoided, because avoiding conflict, I think it's Helen Keller who said, is no safer in the long run than outright conflict, right? And so we get this artificial harmony, which we talk a lot about with teams, and it seems to resonate with people. This idea that there's conflict just because you can't see it or it's not being talked about around the boardroom table does not mean there's not conflict. I think all of us have taken a friend out for beer and vented about our disappointment, our frustration with decisions that the boss made, right, or that an employee made, or that conflict is going to have an impact if it's unresolved. It's going to leak out into other relationships. It's going to, meetings before the meetings. If you're having lots of meetings before and after meetings, there's a pretty good chance you're not having the real conversations in the actual meeting itself. And so lots of symptoms of artificial harmony and unhealthy conflict that keep us in the dysfunctional side of conflict, right? And there is a very functional component of conflict. Like you said, it helps drive meaningful connection if we can go a layer below the strategy. Right? This isn't about your preference to get this need met and my preference to get my need met. It's the recognition that we probably actually have the same need or very similar needs, and that if we talk about those and co-create solutions and ideas to do that, that's where that creativity and innovation actually occurs, right? And so it's working through that, and it is that awareness, that will, and that skill for sure when it comes to navigating conflict. Awesome. What else do we have on the list? What haven't we talked about?
Stuckness.
Yeah. So I was talking with a client last week, and she relayed to me that she had spent the bulk of the day not being very productive, and she felt very, very stuck. And as we started to explore that, it comes back down to understanding what's meaningful. Or for her, it was, a lack of awareness of what's most meaningful can have us doing things for the sake of doing them because we've always done them that way. Right. And that stuckness, I think, is a real phenomenon. I think that a lot of us experienced some aspect of that and had some realization through the pandemic over the past couple of years that, I was stuck in this job, and now I'm not stuck in my commute anymore. So there's a big debate about return to office. We see lots of tension and conflict kind of starting to arise about employers who want to fill the office up and workers who are like, actually, I'd like to work from home at least a couple days a week. And so there's an event that got people unstuck, but we all find ourselves stuck in different ways in life, for sure, in relationships, in work patterns, and those types of things. Why is it such a big problem? Like, why is stuckness something that we've identified as equivalent or, worth talking about in the same way of burnout or misuses of power? When you think of stuckness, what happens when people are stuck?
Yeah, I mean, we hear words like right now, people talk about languishing. Adam Grant talks about languishing, complacency, fixed mindset. These are some of the words that we're hearing, or not a willingness to change. How it shows up is we've got this term adaptive capacity, right? And that can happen at the individual, team, or organizational level. But I think the problem is, for an organization, for example, is, you're an organization, you've got your core values, you've got your purpose or your mission that you're on. Maybe you've got a problem that you're helping solve in the world, but you're not doing it. Or you're maybe not drinking your own champagne internally with the things that you're doing externally. So symptoms of stuckness could be your performance as an organization, right? Not just, financially, but culturally, right? Your brand may be suffering. You're not seen as an innovator or leader anymore, right? These are some of the symptoms that, at the organization. As a leader, you may feel overwhelmed and not know where should you be putting your effort. You might be asking yourself, why am I having this impact that's so negative on my team? I'm scared to do something like terrible next, right? And you freeze, or even worse, you do something that you think is going to help, and you shove down another policy or a procedure down people's throats, and it has even a worse reaction, right? So I think stuckness shows up at varying levels for people. I think one thing we're seeing is, and COVID may have been a catalyst, silver lining, I don't know what you want to call it, but is the identity, I think, and personal purpose. People are reassessing, and starting to explore what is truly meaningful to them, and are they living that? Are they making advances, or are they growing in those areas they want? So I don't think stuckness is necessarily like paralysis. You're not doing anything. You could actually be
very busy and doing lots of things,
exactly,
but they're either not making an impact or not making the impact you want, or oftentimes unintentionally we're pushing the lever in the wrong direction. Right, totally. We're doubling down on an old way of managing, or we're going more command and control. Or I just saw the other day some stat about how many firms are now spying on their employees with spyware on their computers. It's like ridiculous stat. I was like, are you kidding me? Like we go to micromanagement, or we go to more control instead of more distributed power. I think that stuckness can drive us to take action, and that action risks being misaligned with what we actually need to be doing to solve the underlying problem. So that it can look, stuckness can look like a hamster wheel, like we're running fast to do things, but we're not making progress.
Yeah, I love that example you just gave about the, spying in on employees, because, you think about trust, you think about intention versus impact, ethical leadership. Like another version of that story could be like, hey, we want to learn more about your behaviors working from home so we can support you more, right? That's could be. I'm not saying it is. I don't know these stories. That could be the intention, but the impact is, no, you're spying on me. and because these decisions you're making, you're using that data, you know what I mean? And it's harmful. I don't know. That's an interesting, I think we should chat about that one another time.
That's probably a topic all in its own. Yeah. Is the surveillance state that we live in more broadly, but when corporations or when companies start to do things like that, like spy, when the impact on the experience and trust and all of those things, which, for me, if somebody started spying on me and they were my employer, that would be a quick ticket to finding a new employer for sure. So
totally. And just like, I know we're not going to go down this route, but we've been talking about it with some of our clients about they're talking about business intelligence and HR analytics, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, for the sake of what? Like, why? What data are you collecting? How are you, what's your intention, and is that the impact you're going to have? That's actually a big topic, even for us as an organization, I think, to get into.
Yeah, there's tons to get into. Any one of these topics has many different layers and things that will unfold from it. Any last words for this particular episode that we want people to walk away from? I think I'll let you think on that, because I think I have something, takeaway for me when we think about problems is oftentimes we tend to locate problems inside of people. Like, what's Pablo's problem? Or why is Pablo a problem? Why is Jeff a problem? Why is so-and-so a problem? Instead of saying, where is the problem? Right? Where is the problem locates problems in systems, in relationships, in meaning or lack thereof. And you and I can, if we locate a problem that's not inside of one of us, we can look at it and we can align it. We can collaborate on how to fix that problem. And so that's one thing. When you think about these, when you think about your own burnout, you think of your own disconnection, try and dislocate it from being a thing that's your fault, that you're to blame for, right? I actually just had this conversation with a group the other day about burnout and boundary setting, and people were beating themselves up at their inability to set boundaries. And it was like just another thing to feel guilty about. And I think any one of these problems are natural problems that arise from systems and from misuses of power and these things that we've flagged already, that they're not your problem solely. We contribute, obviously, to the experiences we have in life, but to take these and hold them a bit more loosely and say, like, where does this show up and why and how and when and with who, as opposed to this is my burnout and I have to fix it, right? I think that individualizing these problems is maybe its own problem. It's this like individual nature of things. And so those are my last words on these topics for now, but anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I'll add. So just to repeat them again: unethical leadership, misused power, disconnection, conflict, stuckness, and burnout. So 7. Yeah, for me, I come back to conscious communication. Like, I think that's what we're trying to achieve here. And if we go to it, we have a 3Ds framework for anybody that's new to us. It's on our site if you want to check it out and learn more. But, deep listening. I think, as we communicate and have, well, I'm going to get into the second one, but as we have meaningful dialogue, I think that's the goal with these, and to identify, other impactful problems or meaningful problems. I think just being conscious about the way we're communicating about these is something that I want to, we're holding the power of this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
We get to choose who comes on and speaks, the topics and all that. And so my challenge to the community would be just to really hold us accountable for that and make sure that we're deep listening, we're engaging in meaningful dialogue. And then as leaders, when we go back, there's probably some direction or directive that we will need to lead with. So that stands out for me.
Awesome. Until next time.
Next time.